The most powerful warship ever built by the United States Navy is sailing to its final port, and America may not have a ready replacement. Right now, in April 2026, the USS Nimitz, CVN 68, is making its last voyage, not to a conflict zone, not to a deterrence patrol in contested waters, to a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, where the two nuclear reactors that have powered this vessel for 51 years will be shut down and removed forever. The world's oldest active nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is leaving the fleet. And the question being asked inside the Pentagon, on Capitol Hill, and in military planning rooms from Tokyo to Riyadh right now is this: can America afford to lose it because the ship designated to replace the Nimitz is not ready? The USS John F. Kennedy, the second Gerald R. Ford-class carrier, had its delivery pushed back from July 2025 all the way to March 2027, a full 2-year delay. Which means America is facing what military analysts have started calling the Nimitz Gap, a period where the world's most powerful Navy will be operating with one fewer carrier than federal law requires, at the exact moment when global demand for carrier power has never been higher. That is not fiction. That is not speculation. That is the verified strategic reality of April 2026, and it is a story that deserves the depth and precision it has not yet received. If this channel is where you come to understand what is actually happening behind the headlines, subscribe now and hit the bell icon. We do not do managed narrative here. We do the full picture. To understand why the retirement of the USS Nimitz is a genuine strategic event and not simply the routine decommissioning of an aging vessel, you have to understand what this ship has actually been for half a century. The Nimitz was commissioned on May 3, 1975 at Naval Station, Norfolk, Virginia. President Gerald Ford was there for the ceremony, a fitting detail, given that the ship that would eventually replace it bears the name of his successor's predecessor. The Nimitz was named after Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the commander of U.S. Pacific Fleet during World War II, the man who turned the tide at Midway, who drove the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific, and who accepted Japan's surrender aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in 1945. The choice of name was not incidental. It was a declaration of intent. This ship would carry the weight of American naval supremacy into a new era, and it did. The Nimitz's first real operational test came 5 years after its commissioning in 1980, when it was sent to the Arabian Sea to support Operation Eagle Claw, the Carter administration's attempt to rescue 52 American hostages held in Iran following the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The mission failed catastrophically, not because of the Nimitz, but because of a helicopter shortage deep in the Iranian desert. 8 American servicemen died in a collision during the abort sequence. The Nimitz was there, carrying the mission on its flight deck, unable to change an outcome determined by decisions made ashore. That mission failure matters now, in 2026, because the Trump administration has explicitly cited it in its current posture toward Iran, as part of a documented list of Iranian regime actions against American citizens that informs current U.S. policy. The Nimitz was present at the beginning of the American-Iranian confrontation that continues to shape the Middle East today. It is now departing as that confrontation reaches what may be its most serious phase in 4 decades. In 1991, the Nimitz projected air power over the Arabian Gulf during Operation Desert Storm. In 2001 and the years that followed, it deployed in support of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, putting American air power over some of the most contested airspace in modern warfare. In 2020, during COVID-19, it completed a deployment of 341 days, the longest carrier deployment since Vietnam. In 2025, its final scheduled deployment, it completed 8,500 combat sorties, logged 17,000 flight hours, conducted 50 replenishments at sea, sailed 82,000 nautical miles, and participated in strikes against ISIS targets in Somalia while operating across 3 fleet areas: U.S. Central Command, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and U.S. Africa Command. This is not a ship that coasted through its final years. It worked to the end. But there is a reason the Nimitz must go, and it has nothing to do with strategic preference or budget convenience. The 2 Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors that power this carrier have reached the hard physical limit of their operational lifespan. Unlike earlier in its service life, when the Nimitz underwent a comprehensive refueling and complex overhaul that extended its service by decades, another refueling is not economically or strategically viable. The reactors are done. The ship is done. The question is not whether to retire it. The question is what happens during the gap before its replacement arrives. Here is what most coverage of the Nimitz retirement has failed to adequately explain. Losing one carrier does not mean losing one ship. It means losing an entire strike group. A carrier strike group is not just the carrier. When the Nimitz deployed in 2025, it led Carrier Strike Group 11. That strike group included the carrier itself, carrying up to 90 aircraft, FA-18 Hornets, F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets, E-2D Hawkeye airborne radar platforms, and MH-60 helicopters, along with guided missile cruisers, multiple Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, attack submarines operating in screening positions, and logistics vessels maintaining the group's endurance at sea. The carrier is the center of gravity of a floating battle force capable of projecting air power anywhere on Earth within days, without needing permission from any foreign government to use their airfields. When that carrier goes away, all of that goes with it. Federal law, specifically a 2011 statute, requires the U.S. Navy to maintain a minimum of 11 active aircraft carriers. The reason is simple. With maintenance cycles, refueling overhauls, and transit times factored in, only about 5 or 6 carriers are operationally available at any given moment. 11 carriers in the fleet means roughly 5 or 6 available for deployment. Drop to 10, and that number falls further, to a point where, as defense analysts have directly stated, the Navy cannot sustain more than 2 carriers deployed to any single region simultaneously without stripping other theaters of their coverage. Now consider the current operational environment. At this moment, 2 U.S. carriers, the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln, are committed to Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israeli campaign against Iran that began on February 28, 2026. The only carrier in the Western Pacific is the USS George Washington, forward deployed at Yokosuka, Japan, and as of the last confirmed reporting, it was in its annual maintenance period and not available for rapid deployment. The rest of the fleet is distributed across maintenance cycles, training operations, and other commitments. This is the environment into which the Nimitz gap falls. Defense analyst Brian Clark, quoted in Stars and Stripes, stated directly that dropping to 10 carriers would mean the Navy cannot maintain more than 2 deployed to a single area on a sustained basis, and that operations like those currently underway in the Middle East or in Venezuela would pull carriers away from traditional deterrence missions in the Indo-Pacific. Mark Cancian, a former Marine officer now with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, went further. He argued the Navy needs to extend all Nimitz-class carriers for at least one more deployment, not just the Nimitz, because the domestic shipbuilding program is chronically behind schedule and accelerating Ford-class production will not produce results for years, even if it were feasible. These are not fringe voices. They are among the most credible defense analysts in Washington. And they are describing a real structural problem in American naval power that the retirement of the Nimitz has forced into the open. If you want analysis that connects the hardware to the strategy to the real-world implications, subscribe and hit the bell icon. This is exactly the level of depth we bring to every story. The ship that was supposed to replace the Nimitz is the USS John F. Kennedy, CVN-79, the second Gerald R. Ford-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And the story of why it is not ready tells you something important about the state of American naval modernization. The Gerald R. Ford class was designed to be a generational leap forward from the Nimitz class. Where the Nimitz used steam-powered catapults to launch aircraft, the Ford class uses the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, EMALS, which can propel aircraft into the air with greater precision and significantly less mechanical stress on the airframes. This matters because it extends the operational life of every aircraft that operates from the ship. The Ford class also uses an advanced arresting gear system instead of the older hydraulic recovery systems, reducing mechanical complexity and maintenance requirements. Its radar and sensor architecture are a generation ahead of anything the Nimitz carried, and critically, its design design requires a crew of approximately 2,600 sailors, compared to roughly 5,000 for the Nimitz class, cutting operational costs by hundreds of millions of dollars per deployment cycle. On paper, the Ford class is dramatically superior to the Nimitz class in almost every measurable way. But the lead ship, USS Gerald R. Ford itself, spent years after its 2017 commissioning dealing with problems in exactly the EMALs and advanced arresting gear systems that define the class. Those systems, never before deployed at sea, required extensive fixes before the Ford could be certified for sustained combat operations. The Kennedy, CVN-79, has encountered similar certification challenges. Its delivery date has been pushed from July 2025 to March 2027. That is a 20-month delay on the ship that was supposed to ensure no gap in carrier strength. A Navy official confirmed to USNI News that the Kennedy's delivery timeline shifted specifically to support completion of advanced arresting gear certification. In plain terms, the most technologically advanced carrier ever built is not ready because its most advanced systems still need to be validated. That is the honest explanation, and it is the direct cause of the Nimitz gap. The Navy's response has been to extend the Nimitz's service life again. This is actually the second extension. The fiscal year 2024 budget request had already pushed the Nimitz's retirement from April 2025 to May 2026. In March 2026, the Navy officially announced a second extension, pushing decommissioning to March 2027, timed to coincide with the expected delivery of the Kennedy so that the fleet maintains its legally required 11 carriers without interruption. To support this extension, the Navy awarded a $95.7 million contract to Huntington Ingalls Industries at Newport News Shipbuilding on March 13, 2026, for advanced planning and long lead materials procurement ahead of the Nimitz's eventual inactivation and defueling. That contract is expected to run through March 2027, a $96 million commitment to plan the death of a ship, because even retiring a nuclear carrier is an undertaking of extraordinary complexity. But here's the question that extension does not fully answer. What does the Nimitz actually do during this final year? The Navy has confirmed that the Nimitz, as of this spring, is deployed to U.S. Southern Command for the Southern Seas 2026 exercises. Its air wing has already been removed, meaning it is not a full combat-capable carrier in this final phase. After Southern Seas concludes, the Navy's plan is to use the Nimitz to support carrier qualifications for new pilots and aircrews. A 51-year-old nuclear supercarrier, one of the most capable warships ever built, spending its final months as a training platform for student aviators. There is something both sobering and fitting about that. The Nimitz trained a generation of American naval aviators across 5 decades. It will spend its last operational year training the next one. When the Nimitz finally goes to Newport News for inactivation, it will enter a process that the United States Navy has never completed before at this scale. And the way that process unfolds will serve as the template for retiring 9 more nuclear carriers over the coming decades. The only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier previously decommissioned was the USS Enterprise CVN-65, which was inactivated in 2012 and officially decommissioned in 2017. The Enterprise featured 8 nuclear reactors, a unique design used only on that one ship. Its dismantling has proceeded slowly because the techniques and industrial processes for safely removing naval nuclear reactors at that scale had to be developed essentially from scratch. As of this writing, the Enterprise has still not completed its major demolition. The Nimitz carries 2 Westinghouse A4W reactors, the same design used across all 10 Nimitz-class carriers. The process developed to remove and safely dispose of the Nimitz's reactors will become the standard operating procedure for the 9 sister ships that will follow it into retirement over the next several decades. Get it right with the Nimitz, and the Navy has a validated playbook for one of the most complex industrial undertakings in its history. Get it wrong, and those problems compound across every subsequent decommissioning. Newport News Shipbuilding, owned by Huntington Ingalls Industries and the only yard in the United States with the expertise to build and defuel nuclear-powered carriers, is simultaneously managing the Ford and Kennedy programs, midlife refueling overhauls for other Nimitz-class carriers, and now the unprecedented task of decommissioning the lead ship of the class. The industrial capacity strain is real and documented. Defense analysts have noted that even the decision to keep the Nimitz in service until 2027, rather than beginning decommissioning in 2026, has downstream effects on Newport News' schedule, because the yard cannot begin the most intensive defueling work until the ship actually arrives and is formally inactivated. The nuclear fuel removed from the Nimitz will not simply be disposed of locally, it will be transported to a Department of Energy facility for safe long-term storage, part of a larger challenge in U.S. nuclear materials management that extends well beyond the Navy's immediate concerns. The entire decommissioning process, from initial inactivation through the ship terminal offload program, defueling, and eventual structural dismantlement, is expected to take years and ultimately cost in the range of $500 million to $358 million in contracted work, with the final number likely higher as the full scope of the process becomes clear. This is what ending the service of a nuclear supercarrier actually looks like. Not a ceremony and a press release, a decade-long industrial and logistical undertaking that tests the limits of the only shipyard qualified to execute it. The timing of the Nimitz's retirement and the Nimitz gap it creates does not exist in a vacuum. It intersects with a global strategic environment that has become more demanding of American carrier power, not less. In the Middle East, Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran that began February 28, 2026, has two carrier strike groups committed to an active combat role. This is not a deterrence posture. This is sustained combat operations with carriers actively supporting strike missions against hardened targets. The demand on carrier flight decks in that theater is at its highest level since the Gulf War era. Iran's own posture has shifted in ways that directly implicate the discussion of American naval power. The Trump administration has explicitly deployed carrier strike groups to the region as a deterrent signal, the same strategic logic that has governed American policy in the Persian Gulf for decades. The presence of carriers in the region sends a message. Their absence, or reduction, sends a different one. In the Indo-Pacific, China's carrier program has accelerated. China now operates 3 aircraft carriers, with a 4th under construction. The Fujian, China's most advanced carrier, is undergoing sea trials and is expected to reach operational status in the near future. China's strategic goal, developing the capacity to contest American naval dominance in the Western Pacific in a Taiwan contingency, is not a theoretical projection. It is an active program documented and confirmed by the Pentagon's own annual reports to Congress. Every American carrier that is unavailable for deployment in the Pacific is a reduction in the deterrent mass that shapes Chinese calculations about the costs of military action. In Europe, the expansion of NATO's eastern flank following Russia's invasion of Ukraine has created new demands for American naval presence in the Atlantic and Mediterranean that did not exist 5 years ago. The United States is being asked to do more with its carrier fleet simultaneously across 3 major theaters at a moment when that fleet is in generational transition, retiring its oldest carrier without a ready replacement while also managing the midlife overhauls of the remaining Nimitz-class ships and the certification of a new class whose defining technologies have experienced repeated delays. This is the honest strategic picture, not a catastrophe, not collapse, but genuine strain, the kind of strain that does not produce dramatic failures in normal times, but that reduces the margin for error when abnormal events occur. When 2 crises emerge simultaneously, when a maintenance period runs long, when a new system fails its certification again, the Navy's own analysts have said clearly, dropping to 10 operational carriers reduces the service's ability to respond to concurrent demands. That is not advocacy, that is arithmetic. The USS Nimitz leaves a legacy that will not be replaced by a single ship. It will be replaced by an entire class of ships, and by a doctrine of carrier aviation that the Ford class is designed to carry forward with greater efficiency and greater technological capability. The USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78, commissioned in 2017, has now worked through its early systems challenges and completed what the Navy reported as the longest carrier deployment since the Vietnam War. The operational problems that plagued its early years, the EMALS failures, the advanced arresting gear issues, the advanced weapons elevator malfunctions, have been addressed through years of engineering work, software updates, and hardware modifications. The Ford class is maturing. The USS John F. Kennedy, CVN-79, is the next ship in that class, and its delivery in March 2027 will begin the process of replacing the Nimitz in the fleet's operational rotation. After the Kennedy comes USS Enterprise CVN-80, a name deliberately chosen to carry forward the legacy of the Navy's first nuclear carrier. And after Enterprise, USS Doris Miller, CVN-81, named for the black sailor who received the Navy Cross for heroism at Pearl Harbor, the first enlisted sailor to receive that honor in World War II. Each of these ships carries the electromagnetic launch system, the advanced arresting gear, the enhanced radar and sensor architecture, and the smaller crew requirement that define the Ford class. Each one is designed to be more capable than the Nimitz class in almost every operational dimension, and each one will serve for approximately 50 years, meaning the ships under construction now will still be operating in the 2070s and 2080s, confronting threats and strategic environments that we cannot yet fully predict. The Nimitz's 9 sister ships, Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, Carl Vinson, Harry S. Truman, Theodore Roosevelt, John C. Stennis, George Washington, John C. Stennis, and George H.W. Bush will follow it into retirement on a rolling schedule over the coming decades, each requiring the same complex nuclear defueling process that the Nimitz is pioneering. The decommissioning of the Nimitz is therefore not just the end of one ship's story. It is the beginning of a 30-year industrial and strategic process that will reshape the composition of American naval power. The USS George H.W. Bush, the last Nimitz-class carrier built, commissioned in 2009, is expected to remain in service until 2059. The Nimitz class will be with the Navy for decades yet, but the class's founder, the ship that gave 10 successors their design, their doctrine, and their name, is done. There is a tendency in coverage of major military platforms to reduce them to specifications: displacement 100,000 tons, length 192 feet, aircraft capacity up to 90, crew approximately 5,000 sailors and aviators, nuclear reactors, 2 Westinghouse A4W, maximum speed over 30 knots. Those numbers are accurate. They do not capture what the Nimitz was. The Nimitz was commissioned 5 days after the fall of Saigon, when American military credibility was at one of its lowest points of the 20th century. It was deployed to the Arabian Sea during the Iran hostage crisis, a mission that failed. It served through the Cold War, the Gulf War, the War on Terror, and the beginning of what strategic analysts are calling the era of great power competition. In its final deployment in 2025, its crew, 5,000 Americans living and working on a floating city at sea, completed 8,500 sorties and 17,000 flight hours in waters stretching from the South China Sea to the Arabian Sea to the waters off Somalia, projecting American air power without a single foreign airstrip required. The ship carried presidents, allied heads of state, and thousands of sailors across every ocean on the planet. It celebrated its 350,000th arrested landing in April 2023, at the end of a flight operations period no different from the 10,000 that preceded it. Every one of those landings was a human being in a fighter jet, approaching a moving flight deck at over 150 miles per hour, trusting the ship and the crew to bring them home. That is what the Nimitz was, and now it is sailing around the tip of South America, toward Norfolk, toward Newport News, toward the end. America's carrier fleet will continue, the Ford class will mature, the Kennedy will commission, the Enterprise will follow. The strategic logic of carrier aviation, the proposition that a nation capable of projecting sustained air power to any point on Earth without requiring permission from any host nation, holds a form of strategic leverage that cannot be replicated by any other instrument, remains valid and remains the foundation of American naval doctrine. But the specific ship that embodied that logic for 51 years, that carried it through the Cold War and the Gulf War and the age of terrorism and into the age of strategic competition, is making its last passage. The Nimitz gap is real. The strategic demands on American carrier power are real. The delays in the replacement are real. And the question of whether the United States can sustain its global commitments through this transition period with one fewer carrier in 3 active theaters against the most capable peer competitors it has faced since the Soviet Union is the most important naval question of this decade. It will be answered not by declarations of resolve, but by the decisions made in Newport News shipyards, in Pentagon planning cells, in congressional appropriations committees, and in the operational choices of the sailors and commanders who inherit a fleet in transition. The Nimitz earned every one of its 51 years. What comes next will have to earn them too. If this analysis delivered what the headlines didn't, share it, hit like, and subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. The next chapter of this story is already being written. Stay informed, stay sharp. We will see you in the next one.